Sorry that we started a little bit late, but we had a bit of tech issues, which is pretty normal when you do these live streams. So thank you for being patient with us and joining us. Today we have Joel and Betsy Eyestone, and why don't you two introduce yourselves briefly?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm Joel Eyestone. I'm a third culture kid. I was raised in about 3 or 4 different places, but I spent about half my life in the Philippines. And now living in Washington State, still working with WorldVenture. So glad to be here.
Awesome. And I'm Betsy. I grew up in Washington, and I guess I've lived in the Philippines about half my life too, since we went in 1988. So yeah, that's us. We've got 4 kids, and 3 of them are married. Got the 7th grandchild on the way.
Awesome. So before we get really into the questions, I just want to invite all of you who are watching to basically contribute to the conversation in the chat as you feel led. So for instance, if you feel led to pray, feel free to write in a prayer, and we may use your prayer to close our time today. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in there. Even if we're long past the topic, we'll pivot back to it. But we'd like to hear from you. So if you're here today, let us know you're here. Say hi. Betsy and Joel can see the chat on the side, and they can see when you say hi. We'll let you know that we've seen it too. So anyway, let's start with something fun. So you spent half your life in the Philippines. What was your favorite Filipino dish, food-wise?
Oh boy, I always have to kind of think about that because there's several things that I really like, but I'm going to go with adobo, pork or chicken adobo. It's the meat cooked in vinegar and soy sauce and a bay leaf and pepper. It's really good.
That does sound good. I think I've heard of it before, and now I've got to try it next time I'm down in the city area where there might be Filipino food. But go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, I think my favorite became over time sinigang, that would be sinigang na baboy, which is pork sinigang. And that's pork cooked in kind of a sour broth and a bunch of different vegetables. And yeah, that's good on rice. But I really miss the mangoes.
Yeah, we miss the mangoes.
I hear that a lot with mangoes that grow native to a culture. I actually, when I went to Honduras, I had that same expression that when I came back to the U.S. after a brief time there, there's nothing like mangoes fresh.
Yeah.
I tried it at the store. No, can't get the same taste.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics, and we always ask this question so you can kind of everyone get to know the Eyestones. They have a really rich history, and I'm eager for you to learn all about them first. So tell me, and it doesn't matter which one of you want to start, but tell me how you came to know Jesus.
Well, I'm older, so I guess I'll start because I came to know Jesus first. I was taken to church from the time I was an infant. My parents were both strong believers. And when I was 5 years old, we were living in Michigan. I remember going to Sunday school and kids' church. I remember one particular Sunday coming home, I was really struck by the lesson in junior church, kids' church that Sunday, convicted that I was a sinner. I knew that I had done naughty things. And as I went to bed that night, I began to cry, and my mom came into the room to find out why I was crying. And I said that I wanted to trust in Jesus and accept him as my savior. So my mom prayed for me, with me, right then and there, 5 years old. And then I remembered the next morning just feeling just so relieved, so happy, just like I wanted to run around the house and jump.
I can't really remember my experience that clearly, but I know I was very young when I prayed to receive Jesus as my savior. I had the same kind of background growing up in church, but my mom was also a Good News Club teacher, and so I I was exposed to the gospel very early, and my mom remembers much more clearly than I do when I prayed to receive Christ as my Savior.
Awesome. So
But it impacted my life from that point on.
awesome. So now we know that you met Jesus very young. When did it really become your own faith? We always hear that, like youth pastors, sometimes I've heard talk about when a faith becomes your own and not your parents'. When did it become yours?
I would say when I was 11. A couple things happened when I was 11 years old. First, I was baptized. So there was that process, and I don't remember specifics, but leading up to that point of coming to make that decision that I wanted to be baptized, I wanted to publicly say to the whole church that I was believing and following Jesus and wanted to follow him for the rest of my life. So I would say that that's when I really internalized it more and made my own stand. And then about 6 months after that, I was at a summer youth camp, and my dad was the missionary speaker, and he challenged all of us to dedicate our lives to the Lord for whatever God would have for us. And so I did that at that time. I dedicated my life to the Lord. And so that was just another reconfirmation in my own heart and mind that I belong to God and I'm going to follow him and live for him.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, I didn't question it at all. As far as my young understanding, had it, it was my own faith. But by the time I got to be a senior in high school, that was when I realized, okay, well, I'm this way because this is the way I was raised, and that I don't know anything else really. This is what I've known from childhood. So how do I know that it's really true? And so my pastor at that time wisely sent me on a quest to learn about other religions, other sects, and to make my decision based on what I learned from scripture in comparison with these other things. And so from that point, it really was my own faith, not just my parents or not just the way I had been raised, but I had made my own decision to follow Jesus.
Yeah, I've heard that with some parents sometimes is where they'll let their kids kind of learn about different religions out there. And so that sounds like it was very educational and preparing you for the mission field a little bit.
Yeah.
So tell me about, for both or either one of you, parents are the heaviest influence in a person's life. So their example, it stays with us. So share, with us maybe one or two stories from your parents that both heavily influenced you as a believer. And these are like examples, things you've seen them do that really just made you, it really impacted you.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. Again, when I was pretty young, I had already accepted Jesus as my Savior. I would guess I was about 6 or 7 years old. I just have this funny memory of sitting in the laundry basket. We kind of had we had a built-in hamper, like a laundry chute kind of thing in our house where their dirty clothes would go. And I was sitting down, I was sitting in this box of laundry, and my mom was singing Trust and Obey, and it caught my ear, and she taught it to me. And I'm sure there were other times when we rehearsed it and everything, but I just remember being so impressed with the words of that song, Trust and Obey. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And so that was an indelible impression on me from a young age, that my mom taught me just the importance, and that is the way to find happiness and fulfillment in life. I think just my parents' example. My parents were missionaries. From right after they were married, they went overseas. They gave their whole lives to serving God and serving people. So just their lifelong example of using their abilities and talents and opportunities to serve others. My dad had his doctorate. He could have been a professor at a university in the US. He could have done other things that were more financially lucrative. But he was a missionary. And I remember a visitor that we had once in the Philippines just commenting that he was so impressed that even though my dad had a doctorate, he was serving as a missionary. It was just amazing to this visitor that we had. So the life example of my parents living to serve others.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mentioned that my mom was a Good News Club teacher. And as I got older, when I was a young teen, she encouraged me to go to Christian Youth in Action, which is the CEF training for learning to teach 5-day clubs or Good News clubs. And so that definitely influenced me. It was my first ministry opportunity, really, I guess. And also I remember my dad getting up really early in the morning to pray, and he invited us, the rest of the family, to join him in praying really early in the morning. And I just remember kneeling in the living room with my dad to pray. But another big factor was that my parents often had the visiting missionary that would speak at our church or whatever come to our house for dinner after church. And so I got to hear a lot of missionary stories as a child. And then even our summer vacation for at least 2 years, we went to California for a week-long missions conference at Mount Hermon. And so it was a high value. Missions was a high value in our family. Even though my parents weren't missionaries, they were definitely supporters and prayer warriors and senders.
Awesome. Awesome. So when did you two decide to become missionaries? I mean, what inspired that next step?
Well, I'll just continue. It really had a lot to do with that, I think. Growing up in that kind of an environment and being intrigued by the stories of the missionaries and excited by them and thinking, wow, wouldn't that be awesome? And I remember wishing that my parents would become missionaries so we could be missionaries together as a family. But that wasn't God's call. He was calling me, but not necessarily them to go overseas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it was during my college years. I finished high school in the Philippines, came back to the States for college, not really sure exactly what I was going to pursue as a career, but it was, I would say, during my second year at Biola University in Southern California that that call became more clear to me, and that I realized God was burdening me, was leading me, was calling me, giving me that desire to be involved in reaching the unreached with the gospel, taking the gospel to places where there was no church, no Christians. So my second year and at Biola, and I think it was mainly through chapel speakers, also through messages that I heard at church on Sundays, but largely through the chapel speakers and the annual missions conference every spring that Biola has on campus. Those are the things, and that's when I really made that career choice. That I set my path in that direction. Ended up majoring in missions, intercultural studies at Biola, and yeah. Then later, a few years later, that I kind of rehashed my direction again, and confirmed again that that's where God was calling me.
Yeah, I would add that the Biola Missions Conference had a big impact on me too. Even as a child, I thought I wanted to be a missionary, but when I was in high school, I was definitely exploring other options. And it wasn't until I got to Biola and began hearing everything about that again in the missions conference at Biola that I was just like, oh yeah, sorry, Lord, this is what you're calling me for. And so it was at that point then that I decided to do a short-term mission trip to confirm whether that was really what God was calling me to.
Awesome. Yeah, God certainly does make it clear what his will is for our lives. I think every missionary remembers that nudge and that push from him and that pursuing for that. So, in reading your biography, and by the way, just as a reminder, if you have questions out there, welcome to everyone who's coming on. If you have questions, put it in the chat. If you have comments, put it in the chat. You're not interrupting us. We welcome that. So, Joel, you were raised in the Philippines, and Betsy, you were raised in Washington State. So how did you two meet?
You can tell that story.
Well, you've heard us mention Biola. So
Yeah.
Biola was what got both of us to Southern California, but we didn't actually meet there because he was ahead of me a few years. By the time I got there, he was already gone. But we ended up in the same church in the area, and so our involvements in the church included the music ministry. The church had a number of ensembles, and so we were both kind of in different parts of the music ministry. But at one point, the church put on a musical that included all the ensembles joined together to do Joseph the Dreamer. So Joel was cast as Joseph, and his younger brother was cast as Benjamin. And I happened to be cast as Potiphar's wife. So in that case, the story came out a little differently, but that was how we got to know each other. And it was, that was how.
So since, what was a culture shock to you, Betsy, when you served for a short time in Japan and then for so long in the Philippines?
Japan, what I really remember was how long it took my digestive system to get used to eating what they would eat for breakfast. Breakfast was so different. And I just remember, I can't even remember now exactly what kinds of things we ate for breakfast, but in my book, it was not breakfast food. And I just remember that for a while it was hard to eat. But after I got used to the food, I gained several pounds that summer because I learned to really enjoy the food. So it didn't last too long. But as far as cultural things other than food, I didn't understand the shame culture, what would cause a person shame. And so there were things that happened during the summer that I did not understand the reaction of the people around me, particularly the Japanese family that I lived with. I was just bamboozled by some of the things that were happening around me. And now as I look back, I think it was because I did not understand what caused shame in that family, in that culture.
Can you describe, for our audience, can you define honor and shame a little bit, either one of you? You can, in case someone has a lack of understanding of honor and shame.
Well, in contrast, first to American culture tends to look at things more from the viewpoint of right and wrong. Is this the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do?
Guilt and innocence.
Guilt and innocence. So we behave in a way that answers the question: Is this the right thing? Am I going to be innocent, or is this the wrong thing to do? Other cultures are based more on honor and shame. And so what determines their specific action in a given situation is whether this will bring honor to them and their family, or shame to them and their family. And again, American culture is more individualistic. It's whatever is right for me. Yeah, in other cultures, especially Eastern ones, they don't just think about themselves, they think about their whole family. So they are always conscious of being a member of a whole family and what will bring honor or shame to the family. And so they may do something that we would consider not right, dishonest, deceptive, and things that we would thus consider wrong. They would do that and consider it the right thing to do, because by being deceptive, they are protecting the honor of their family. And so where this hits a daily life, maybe just the way you comment about things, the way you ask questions. If you comment that, I don't know, Betsy may have said that she
I'll
didn't.
give an example. This it doesn't quite fit with what you're saying,
okay.
But one of the examples that I clearly remember was I asked in Japanese. I had learned enough Japanese to ask my host, the pastor's wife, about her health. O genki desu ka? How's your health? Because I knew she was having some health problems. And instead, she mocked the way that I said it and just started laughing. So she didn't want to answer. I don't know if she thought there might be somebody else around that would hear, but she didn't want to answer. She couldn't really answer because she didn't speak English, how her health was, and she didn't want to talk to me about her health. So instead, she just laughed. Well, that really surprised me when I was trying to show concern and she laughed at me. so yeah, but there were other things like that I just didn't really understand until I looked back years later.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Carrie Gupta is online and she says really good insights. So Joel, tell me, in coming, because you spent your life growing up in the Philippines, in coming to the United States for the time that you were here, what did you have to unlearn to live in the United States? And what was different or a culture shock to you?
I don't think I really had to unlearn anything. So I grew up in the Philippines. 9 of my first 18 years, so half of my childhood growing up was in the Philippines. But I was surrounded by Americans the whole time. Our church was Filipino, but it was English speaking. School, it was a missionary kids school. I was surrounded by Americans. It was an American curriculum. We spoke English. I had a lot of, American influence around me all the time. Even though I was living in the Philippines, I was never really immersed in Philippine culture and life. So coming back to the States was not difficult for me. I fit in, although there were the jokes, the stories that my college friends told about contemporary entertainment, TV shows they had watched that I was clueless about. So there was that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say I really had to unlearn any behaviors coming back to the States. Strangely enough for me, and I'll just keep going a little bit here.
Yeah.
After spending 14 years in California doing college and seminary and working and getting married and had a baby, we went back to the Philippines. And the more difficult transition, I would say, for me was going back home to the Philippines, because I thought it was home. And I didn't realize how American my viewpoints really were. I discovered that being an adult, head of the family in the Philippines, was a different scene from being a kid and going to Faith Academy, who was surrounded by Americans all the time. So there were aspects of Philippine life and culture that caught me off guard because I expected everything to be familiar and comfortable, but I discovered that it wasn't. And there were things that I really reacted negatively to, the driving, the traffic, for one thing. And so I had to unlearn my American perspective at that point, and reorient my mind to the Philippines. And it was difficult because I thought it was going to be really familiar and comfortable, but it wasn't.
Yeah, we actually found that my adjustment was easier than his because I was expecting it to be extremely different and difficult to learn the language. And, my expectations were so much different that even though I had a farther distance to go in terms of adjusting to the culture, I was better prepared for it because I was expecting to have to do that. So, yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, what we talk before we get into what you do now and everything else, we talk about a lot, if everyone has noticed, the next generation. That's been the topic for the past probably month. And when you were both thinking about going on mission, how did the previous generation help you with making your decisions to be missionaries?
Well, I've talked about my parents.
Yep.
They were a huge influence. I would say besides my parents, there was another couple who really influenced me. I went back to the Philippines for the summer between my junior and senior year in college. That summer, I spent a couple weeks with another missionary family, a couple hours outside of Manila. My parents always lived in the Manila metropolis. And that missionary, when I visited them for a couple of weeks, invited me to come back and work with them for a while after college. So after I graduated from Biola, worked for a couple of years, and then I did go back to the Philippines again as a short-term missionary. And I lived with Dave and Ruth Billings. They were WorldVenture missionaries in the northern Philippines. So I lived with them for a year and a half as a short-term missionary assistant. And I would say that their example, their mentoring of me, Dave giving me a variety of ministry opportunities, responsibilities, was very, very influential in my growth, the development of my skills, my understanding of what missionary work is all about, and church planting and evangelism out in the province was very different from the kind of work that my dad did, who was a Bible college teacher in Manila. That's what really influenced me. And so then after my year and a half of living with them was when the Lord confirmed for me that he was calling me to go back to the Philippines again and join the effort to bring the gospel to every unreached part of the Philippines.
Awesome.
Yeah, besides my parents, just the exposure that I had to missionaries, I don't really remember specific people, just I remember even reading as a family, we would read some missionary biographies. I remember reading about Brother Andrew, and but just hearing all those years growing up in a church that was missional, hearing the missionaries, and then at the the missions conference that we went to as a family, and then at Biola, and then the church that we met and married in, we had a really wonderful missions pastor who spent a lot of time with those of us couples in the church who were aiming at or thinking about becoming missionaries. And she put us through the paces. She had a real program
Nice
for us to go through, but it was very conversation based. We met and we would talk through different topics, and she was really wonderful in mentoring us toward being prepared to go as missionaries. And then she was also influential in making sure that every missionary that went out from that church had a missionary encouragement team that would meet on a monthly basis to pray for the missionary that they were connected with. And I don't know, she just did a lot to prepare us and make sure that we were launched well.
That is so important. So why did you choose WorldVenture?
Well, it was kind of a natural fit for me. My parents joined the mission in 1967, so I grew up from 6th grade on. We were with the mission and with WorldVenture. So I grew up in it. When I went back to the Philippines as a short-term worker, I was with WorldVenture. The missionaries that I worked with were WorldVenture missionaries. And I was inspired by the work that WorldVenture people were doing in the Philippines and by their heart of cooperation and partnership with Filipinos and with other mission organizations. They really had a broad perspective of the kingdom of God and missionary work, and were partnering with many others to work collaboratively in the Philippines. And I just really liked everything that I saw about WorldVenture, as well as the fact that I was a WorldVenture missionary kid when I was growing up. So, yeah, that's why WorldVenture. I still am very glad that we're with WorldVenture. It's a wonderful mission.
And we're glad you're here too.
Thank you.
What about you, Betsy? I mean, I'm sure you two talked about it. Was there any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, I didn't really have in mind any particular organization. Before we met and married, I was thinking that I would become a teacher in a missionary kids school. That was what I was working toward. I was getting my teaching experience when we met. And so I hadn't even begun looking at organizations. I was thinking about missionary kids schools and was aware of some, but I didn't really have any particular place in mind. So I think God was just keeping me in that place until, the leading came from him. I went with WorldVenture because that's where he was going.
Oh, good. So touched briefly on what you did in the past, both of you, in the Philippines when you first started, but really focus more. I'd like you to share with everyone what you're both doing now.
Sure. Yeah. We were appointed with WorldVenture as church planters for the Philippines, and we went to join the church planting effort. Excuse me.
Oh, no worries.
So, but in our 33 years, we did quite a variety of things. Our first term was focused on church planting, starting a couple new churches. But then in our second term, we moved toward leadership training and developing of young church leaders. We were in an area of the Philippines where there was about 10 very young churches that had been started within the last 5 years. And so I worked with a couple other missionary. We worked with a couple other missionary couples to develop these churches. So pastoring, doing leadership training for a couple terms. My primary focus was heading up an extension training center. So WorldVenture has a Bible college in Manila. And through its extension program, they established training sites in many places around the Philippines. So I headed up an extension training center where we taught Bible college level classes and equipped local church members for ministry. So that was for about 8 years we did that. Then I was asked...
Let me just say what I was doing during that time. So during that time, in addition to homeschooling our 4 sons, I taught a few of the extension courses and did some Bible studies and things like that, music ministry and women's ministry and children's ministry at various times in the church. But one of the courses that I taught for the Extension Center, one of the outcomes of that, one of the applications of that ended up leading to a building project to develop a youth center. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, the church we were working in was across the road from a university campus. And through the course she was teaching, she and her students envisioned a youth center where our church could begin more effectively reaching out to all the university students that walked right past the church every day. Then I was asked to become the national director for the extension training program. We were asked to move to Manila, which we did, kicking and screaming. We liked the provincial life. We did not look forward to being immersed in the smog, the air and traffic and noise pollution of Manila. But so for the last half of our time in the Philippines, we lived in Metro Manila. I was the director of the extension program for a while, but then after just a few years, I moved into mission administration. So for our last 12 or 13 years in the Philippines, I was the field treasurer and on the leadership team, mission manager. So I handled the finances and the legal documentation of our mission in the Philippines, the interface with the government agencies and our paperwork and managing properties and vehicles and, all that fun stuff behind the scenes that helps everybody else do their work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was really not happy about moving to Manila because we had just finished building that youth center, and I didn't actually get to participate in the development of the ministry that was going to happen there. So I was pretty heartbroken about that and not happy about moving to Manila and just asking the Lord, okay, what am I going to do in Manila if he's doing mission administration? And but that was the point at which our kids were beginning to leave the nest, and I decided, okay, I needed to retool. So I went back to school, went to seminary to get my master's. And at the same time, I was looking for ways to get involved in the church that we settled on there in Manila. And that led to an outreach, a ministry to street kids. There were street kids everywhere in Manila. And so that really, there was a compassion thing going on there. And so I was able to help develop an education ministry for these out-of-school youth. And so it dovetailed really well with what I was studying in at the seminary, and resulted in an alternative learning center that reached a lot of out-of-school youth. So that was pretty exciting.
Awesome. So in your years of serving in the Philippines, what was most memorable to you? Just share maybe one story.
Through the extension training center in the northern Philippines where we were, I remember the students, the church members who signed up for classes would come, and many of them really grew in their biblical understanding and in their confidence as servants of the Lord, as church members. I remember one man in particular, his name's Ray, and I would say he was kind of a discouraged church leader who had maybe been, chosen to be a deacon in the church and ran into frustrations and challenges and difficulties and was kind of disillusioned with the challenges that he faced and just not having a lot of confidence. But through our classes, he was inspired and gained just so much confidence in what he could do to serve the Lord, and the difference that he could make in others' lives. And he ended up heading up an outreach, starting a daughter church, serving there. And it was just such a blessing to me to see his confidence grow, and his attitude turn from being discouraged to really being excited about serving the Lord.
And for me, it would be seeing what happened in the lives of those students. It wasn't just an education ministry, it was a discipleship ministry too. So I had the privilege of seeing a young man go from being a gang member out of school for a number of years, involved in gangs and in a gang. And that young man, through Shining Stars, which was the name of our alternative learning center, came to Christ and began to grow and ended up graduating and went on to the Expositors Academy, learning to study the word and preach the word. And now he's involved in ministry. He just recently got married to a strong Christian young woman. And so there was just incredible transformation in the life of this young man. And he's just an example of the many that God really changed the trajectory of their life.
Awesome. I love that. So, most of the time we might love what we do, but what is your favorite parts of ministry right now from both of you?
Well, another thing that we got involved in toward the end of the last several years that we were in the Philippines was the Kairos course, teaching the Kairos course. And that is probably my favorite part of what we're doing now, because Kairos is being done all over the world, and it wasn't being done very much here in the Northwest. And so one of the things that really keeps me going or ignites my passion is being able to do the Kairos course here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's what we've been doing pretty much since we got here.
What is that website for Kairos?
SimplyMobilizing.com.
Yeah. Simply Mobilizing is the mother organization that produces the Kairos course and other courses.
It is in the chat, everyone, if you are curious about it. But go ahead, Jill.
Okay. Yeah. My favorite part of the ministry. Wow. Yeah. We've done a lot of different things. And so taking a few steps here, we came back to the U.S. in 2 years ago in 21. And we are involved in about 3 or 4 different kinds of ministry right now. But one of them that we're now doing is we are part of a medical outreach here in Southwest Washington. There is a group of Christians from many different churches in our area who have formed a ministry called Health and Hope Medical Outreach. It's a free medical clinic every Tuesday evening. So we volunteer there as resource specialists. After the patients see the doctor and take care of their medical concerns, we take them and talk about other resources available in the community that might be helpful to them. And we then ask them about their spiritual life and their spiritual health. And we offer to pray for them. And so the great majority of the patients that come to us are very open, willing to talk about spiritual things. And so every Tuesday evening, we have several opportunities to share the gospel, to pray with people, to encourage them in their spiritual life. And so one of my favorite things of what we do now is doing this and leading people to faith in Christ.
A large percentage of the patients are Spanish speaking. So we have been needing to communicate in many cases through an interpreter. And so that has made it a little bit challenging. We're trying to learn Spanish ourselves. we're finding that a little challenging because every time we try to speak Spanish, Tagalog comes out. And so, but we're trying to make an effort to understand those clients.
Yeah, it's
better.
not easy learning what there'll be, English is your primary, then Filipino language, and now Spanish. That's a lot. So where is your support at right now?
We are at 85%, about 85%. So we are kind of low. We have been blessed in the past with some significant one-time gifts. So we have a little bit of a cushion that is keeping us going, even though our monthly support is low, but that's being eaten up little by little. So yeah, that's where we are. And we're just trusting the Lord to keep us
The life
going.
cycle of being on support, up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
can, so if anyone has interested in supporting them, the link is in the comments. If you want to ask them more questions, about what they're doing, you can private message us and I can forward the questions onto them. And you can talk to them directly as well. But you can put your questions in here. We don't mind if you put stuff in the chat and let us know, because we'd love to answer your questions. So how can people pray, besides getting your support up to 100%? How can people pray for you and your ministries right now?
Well, we're involved in a lot of different things besides Kairos and Health and Hope. I'm also a Bible study and fellowship leader. Joel is still serving as the treasurer for the Philippine field for WorldVenture. So just prioritizing well and managing our time wisely would be a couple of things. Another part, actually, of our ministry, since we're here in the States, is helping my parents. So there's a lot of work to be done here on their property where we are living. And so just prioritizing and managing our time wisely. And then also we hope that Joel won't have to be the field treasurer forever. So we're praying that God will raise up someone from the next generation to take his position as the treasurer for the Philippines. We have an upcoming Kairos course in the Seattle area. This will be our first one in the Seattle area that we're excited about. There's a lot of planning and preparation to be done, especially for a course that's a distance away from where we're living. So prayer for that course. And then just for this Health and Hope ministry, for discernment and sensitivity, for opening spiritual conversations with the patients that will move them a step closer to Christ.
Awesome. So if any of you would like to write down a prayer in the chat, we will use that to close our time in about a few minutes or so. Joel, did you want to add anything to the prayer requests, or?
I don't think so. Yeah, those are the ones we came up with together. Yeah, that's
so. WorldVenture in Review, basically, after we interview, we often talk about topics brought up in the past from our social media posts. As you might have noticed, everyone who follows our social media posts, we like to try to inspire you to do things that God is calling you to do. So for instance, if you wanted to go to the Philippines, you can go to worldventure.com/go, and you can complete a form just to talk to someone. We recently had a live stream earlier this week with our newest branch of our ministry called Campus Co-op, led by Quincy and Glenn. This is a new prayer tool for students only. That means if you're not a student, you cannot get the text messages. So, but you can get our emails if you'd like. However, we find that the students really love to pray for the nations, and prayer is the start of heart transformation. So, in hearing about all your ministries going on presently and in the past, what are some of the needs the next generation in your experience that the church can meet practically right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say worldview change, helping the youth recognize that really, as believers, God's mission, his great commission, should be at the center of our lives, and that the decisions that we make about our lives should revolve around what God is doing, what his purposes are that he is accomplishing. And so that's one thing that the Kairos course is for. And actually, we're right now in a training for a new course for youth called The Unfinished Story for Youth. And so churches really helping the young people to get a broader vision of what God is doing in the world, that it's not just about us and just about right here, even though that's important, but how does that impact what God is doing in the world, or how does it join him in what he's doing in the world? So prayer, of course, is a really important thing, helping them to understand that, but also looking beyond and at a bigger picture.
Great answer.
Yeah.
We have a person who has joined us, and it is they asked the question. So glad to hear this update. I promise to pray for you for your current outreach ministries as you try to learn Spanish and for your support needs. And so we've got that one.
Thank you.
Is praying for you. Unfortunately, I don't have a
Thank
name
you.
for that person, but thank you for praying for them. So earlier in the week, we celebrated Bruce Tizzle's church planting efforts in Brazil. And what I was wondering, as I thought about the church planting efforts across the world, you are still working on the Philippines leadership team. What are some of the needs that exist in the Philippines to reach more people with the gospel right now?
In the past, we've been really focused on evangelism and church planting, but that's pretty much being taken by the Philippine church. They're doing that. But one of the big needs we see now is with human trafficking, especially in the central Philippines. It has really become a huge problem. And some of our newer missionaries are beginning to focus on this situation, helping to bring women and girls out of human trafficking and do rehabilitation. The work that they're primarily focusing on is the rehab after other organizations or after have brought them out of the situation they're in, just re-education. So working with that kind of people. And then Islam has always been predominant in the southern Philippines, but in the last decade, I'd say we see it spreading all over the Philippines. There's a real effort by the Islamic peoples of the southern Philippines to fill up the whole Philippines with Islam. And so there's a real need and an opportunity to speak to people of that faith throughout the Philippines. And so we are looking at the opportunities for work, not just with Roman Catholic Filipinos, which has been our focus in the past, but with Filipinos of Muslim background.
And I think there's still a lot of opportunity for partnering with the Philippine church in church planting and development, especially in the central Philippines. There's a really effective method of assisting in church planting there called church partnership evangelism, where churches send people from here to partner with the Filipino church to reach out to their neighbors. And it really provides a great impetus for evangelism and then a pathway into discipleship and church planting. So, and even training, there's a lot of opportunities still for people that can do training or education in the Philippines. And of course, Faith Academy always needs teachers too in Manila. So those are some opportunities.
So lastly, we talked about Bobby and Brianna Brown, who serve refugees and immigrants in the Americas. And the post kind of inspired. Sometimes I've heard it said that the church doesn't have a really good definition of discipleship I'm not talking pastor level, I'm talking regular person attending level. So in your own words, define what discipleship might look like.
Well, a disciple is a person who tries to be like the one that they're following. And I would say discipleship is a lifestyle of bringing somebody else along to learn how to follow Jesus, both by explaining. If I'm discipling somebody, I'm explaining to them Jesus' teachings. I'm helping them understand, and I'm showing them by my lifestyle how to follow Jesus, and talking through how they express their faith and how they follow Jesus. So discipleship is a one-on-one passing on of life habits and vision and convictions from one person to another.
Awesome. Great definition. So if you have any further questions, we're about to wrap up our time. We just want to share with you that next week we have another live of WorldVenture in Review. We're featuring the Newkirks from Senegal. We're going to hear an update on their church plant. So I hope you join us next week. It'll be the Thanksgiving edition, but it will be the day before. So don't worry, we won't interrupt your turkey. But I want to thank you, Joel and Betsy, for joining. We have all the links in the comments. So from Kairos to their giving link, if you want to partner with them. And again, if you are watching this after the fact and you would like to ask questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I monitor it, so I will make sure they get the questions and we'll get you an answer to it. So stay on, Joel and Betsy. But thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you for hanging on. Have a great rest of your week. Have a good one, everyone.